click that subscribe button and click the notification bell, and I will fill your life with the best kind of scares. You know, human beings are quite loud. Even when we try our best, attempting to step through the grass and leaves weightlessly, we make much more noise than any other animal in those forests. You may not be thinking about it when you enter the woods, but the moment you step foot under the canopy, everything knows you're there, and the things that are hungry and larger than you are often the first to come and find you. Enjoy these 10 allegedly true scary stories from the woods. Remember, you can get your story in an episode. Just submit it at darknessprevails.org. For those listening or watching on an Apple device, please take a moment of your time to leave a review on iTunes via the link below. Thank you. The Man in the Forest by Nino. I was 15 years old at the time. It was in Greece in 2011. My grandfather had recently passed away, so we thought it would be nice to take my grandmother to the place she met my grandfather many years ago. We were all spending a 2-week holiday in the little island of Mykonos. The good thing about this place is that it's mostly little stone and brick homes dotted around the forest landscape, hardly touristy. Anyway, my father and I left the house one afternoon. We walked around the large house and into the forests surrounding the property. We took a day pack with some standard equipment, as well as our phones and a camera, because at the time my father worked as a freelance photographer. We began by leaving the area which surrounded the house we had rented and took off towards the center of the island where the forests were. We had left the house just a few hours after midday as it got quite hot in the middle of the day. By the time it was 6 or 7 p.m., we had made it to the woods, but we knew we had to turn back soon before it got really dark. We set up the camera, took some beautiful photos of the landscape, as well as the various wildlife. That's around the time it started to get weird. I followed my dad a little further into the deeper reaches of the forest when we began to hear something strange. We assumed it was one of the larger animals of the forest, bunking down for the night, so we pushed on. We came around the corner to a ravine, inside of which was a man. He was weirdly dressed in purple drapes and what seemed to be a turban, like formal religious dress in the middle of a deep and dirty ravine in a forest on a desolate island in Greece. And the man was not alone. He had with him a dirty shovel in one hand and was digging a large hole. And beside him was a figure whose gender and looks I could not discern because of how dark it was getting. The figure was lying on the ground and their face was in the dirt. They were lifeless. My father started to take his camera out from its respective bag. He removed the lens cap slowly and positioned the camera forward toward the figure, hoping to capture a photo of the man in the act. But my dad clicked the shutter button too early, causing an audible snapping sound, yet capturing nothing but the grass below us. The man snapped around, his eyes meeting mine. My father and I took off. We didn't look back at all until we reached the edge of the property. We had no idea how long we had been running by then. We stopped to finally catch our breath and glanced back into the woods. It was pitch black, the sun now completely over the horizon. We shuddered and walked back inside the house. That night we filed a police report. The next morning we were due to leave, and when the sun had risen, we packed up everything and prepared to leave the house. But as we were leaving, we noticed something on the doorstep, a dirt-covered shovel. My dad swears we'll never go back until the police are sure they found the man. Be careful telling the forest your every secret. By Weird Allah. There was a strip of forest very close to my home, and sometimes it was the only place I felt comfortable. I was a very shy child, and I did not get along with other children in school. I was extremely reserved. My parents always forced me to mix it up with the other kids and take part in after-school activities, but the only place I ever really wanted to be was the woods. There was something peaceful about that quiet, the only place I wasn't judged or ridiculed. I used to love going out there, walking around, drawing. I knew my way around the forest, as I'd been there so many times before. On a particularly bad day for me, I went out into the woods and didn't feel like drawing or walking around. Instead, I sat in a quiet spot, and I simply talked to myself. Or maybe not to myself, but to the woods. I was a very self-reflective child, and I remember the first time I just sat there, just talking to myself or no one in particular. To others, it must have looked like I was crazy, but I was talking to nature, the trees, and anything and everything around me. It felt good talking that way, and even though I couldn't hear anything reply back to me, it definitely did feel like at the time the forest was listening to me, and I would take the wind blowing through leaves as a reply. That's all I needed. I told it everything I was scared of, worried about, and just how constantly on edge I seemed to be. I was also very scared of the dark as a child, and needed a nightlight to sleep at night. I believed in ghosts and monsters, and even though my parents kept on telling me they didn't exist, deep down I just couldn't believe that yet. As I began expressing myself to the forest, I found myself feeling a little bit weightless, a little bit happier during the day. One afternoon after school, I was in my spot, sitting down, telling the forest my secrets, the usual. But there was something different about those woods that day. For the first time in ever, the wind was gone. The trees seemed calm, and the animals seemed to be in hiding. Nothing at all around me making any sort of noise, except for myself. And for the first time, I was beginning to feel unnerved by the place that had made me feel safe. I decided today was a bad day for this. I began to get up, ready to walk home, but inside I felt like I had so much more to say. But now, I felt like I needed to bottle things up again. The next day when I went out there, things changed again. It was just as silent as before, except for the animals, who were more lively, but in a very eerie way. They were acting in a way they had never done before. I saw squirrels, foxes, birds, and even slugs, and every time I noticed an animal, they were motionless and staring in my direction. It was as if they were mocking me. It's quite a disturbing feeling when the cute face of an animal scares you to your core. Even the birds in the trees began flying over me more and more, at several points almost hitting me, and when they sang their songs they seemed to be laughing. This wasn't my forest anymore. Once again, I left for home earlier than usual, the entire way back, reminding myself that this is just nature, and with nature, showing any sign of weakness is a bad idea. Then came the event that kept me out of the woods for good, that turned my refuge into a nightmare. In the middle of the night, I woke up. There was a sound at my window that sounded like tapping. I rubbed my sleepy eyes and sat up. Then I looked toward the window. There I saw antlers. Curious, I walked over and looked outside the window. I was amazed at what I saw. There were deer, rabbits, and birds, all set in different spots in the yard, all of them looking toward my window. I think anyone would feel unnerved at the moment seeing something like this, but I felt more awestruck at first. The moment those creatures saw that they had my attention, they all turned in the direction of the tree line, in the direction of something new and terrifying. There, in the shallow part of the darkness, I saw two red eyes. They were massive eyes, angled in a way that made them look furious, daunting, and hungry. They stayed still in that part of the forest as the entire group of animals began to make their way toward this set of eyes, all while looking back at me, mocking me again with their emotionless faces. The moment one of these smaller creatures came within reach of the red-eyed entity, a pale, skin-covered hand reached out, squeezing what appeared to be a rabbit, and pulled it into the darkness with it, up toward where the mouth would be. The eyes closed only for a moment, and when they opened again, the creature dropped something to the ground. Something that was missing pieces. Something that used to be a rabbit. One by one, the animals seemed to line up, allowing themselves to become a meal, a victim for this unseen monster. I was so freaking horrified that I ran back to bed and covered myself with a blanket. There I shook nervously until the sun rose. When I built up my courage, I went outside into the tree line to see if I could find any remains. I went to the exact spot I had seen those eyes. Was it a dream? Was it a nightmare? Had it been my anxiety turning my thoughts into something twisted? I wasn't sure, especially when all I found at the tree line was a broken off antler and a few splatters of red. That couldn't be all that remained of what I saw last night. Or maybe it was a coincidence, and everything else had been a nightmare. Either way, I took this as a warning to not go into those woods anymore. Something was telling me that I did not belong in there, that I was no longer welcome. And deep down, I physically had a sickening sensation, like if I did go back in, then I would become prey. For the remainder of our time living there at that house in the woods, I played inside, finding any and every excuse not to go toward the woods. I know what happened to me may not have been more than a dream, but I'm sure you all would understand. After everything that happened to me, and then having a nightmare like that, I think there's more going on in those woods, and that's why I want to say, be careful telling the forest your deepest fears and secrets, because they are listening, and they will use it against you. Take this story, my most bizarre and disturbing experience, and believe what you will. As for me, I'll stay far away from the trees. The Forest Beside the Beach by Jessica W. I was an overexcited 7-year-old, and thanks to our TV, I'd seen a lot of stuff that I probably shouldn't have been able to see yet. Gruesome crimes, live births, and things like that. Despite it being fictional on our widescreen LG TV, it was still enough to make me curious and a little bit scared. Now, growing up in a family of 6, 4 of whom are step-siblings, and being in the middle-aged group of them, nobody really cares about me that much. While that does sound depressing, it's true. I could look after myself and choose what's best, and there were times I was completely forgotten about. Luckily, I had a lot of self-esteem and confidence. I was able to stand in front of a crowd and make a fool of myself, and brush it all off with a laugh in the end. But there came a day in my young childhood life when something happened that brought my confidence crashing down. One day, my step-sibling and I ran off into the undergrowth to cool off, to get away from the hot sun on a very warm day. His mother had convinced my father to go to the beach, and by then the sand was absolutely scalding our feet. Luckily, those beaches were surrounded by thick forest, so my step-sibling took me by the hand. We both smiled and dashed forth into the forest, feeling the cool relief of shade on our skin. But we ended up going much further than we were probably allowed. But that's the thing about being forgotten. You end up getting away with things you shouldn't get away with. The forest seemed louder that day. It was the afternoon, and the squeaks and chirps sounded desperate rather than neutral. But maybe it was just me. We were still laughing and joking around by then, until we heard the first growl. I had heard it faintly at first, but ignored it, thinking it was something else or a trick of the ears. Then came the second growl. I slapped my hand to my step-sibling's mouth, telling him to hush, then slowly removed it. We heard violent cracks and careless footsteps, as if something larger than us did not care if we heard it. Whatever it was seemed confident that it would be getting what it wanted. "We gotta go," I whispered into my step-sibling's ear. He nodded, and we ran, until a soul-shattering screech ripped through the forest, causing the sudden silence to break, sending birds flying and rabbits and raccoons running, paying absolutely no attention to us, rather eager to get away from this thing. We followed our footsteps that we had imprinted into the wet mud. I believe it had rained the previous night, and thank the Lord it had, or else that day would have probably been the end for the two of us. After several minutes, we burst out of the tree line, eyes full of sand. When I turned around, my eyes now watery due to the sand that had collected in them from the wind, I caught sight of something. It was 7 feet tall and almost human-like, except for what looked like wings hanging from its back and the 2 holes in its face. Its nose was not human either, more like a snake's, and apart from that, its face only had a mouth. It had these oversized arms that reached its knees, and the legs itself were fat, yet wobbled under its torso's weight. Its stomach was small yet chubby, and the color of its skin was a sort of whitish-bluish color. Its mouth was twisted into a sharp grin as it raised its large 2-fingered hands, which gave its head a run for its money. The strange thing was, there were no teeth in its mouth. It seemed to wave at us, mimicking a sort of goodbye. I froze. Everything around me seemed to stop, and I did the one thing I should have never done. I waved back at it. Its grin stretched even wider until the skin seemed to rip at the corners. As I stood motionless, staring, my step-sibling yanked me by the arm and dragged me out of the woods. We had made it out alive, but I had not made it out in one piece, at least not mentally. I was more confused than I'd ever been, more amazed and more horrified too. For a long time that would bring me to the end of my story, but sadly, it did not end back at that beach. I don't know if something is out to get me, or if I have some sort of disability that's causing me to hallucinate that creature, but I've seen it from time to time. It's been decades, but I still see it. I wish I could get help, but I don't know what to tell people. And what if it isn't something that's wrong with my mind? What if it's real? If people do believe me, what would we even do about it? Lost in the Forest by Alex. When this happened to me, I was between 10 and 11 years old. I lived in the countryside, near the mountains in a country in Europe. The village in which I lived was surrounded by other small villages and towns, and from the other side, There were massive forests and mountains. My home, in fact, was on a hill, and north to my house there was my grandma's place, and to the south were woods. It was around autumn time, I think, and back then one of my chores was to go look for mushrooms in the woods, but my parents would never let me go alone. But because I enjoyed doing this, I would sometimes lie if I didn't have anyone to go with me, and my parents would let me go. If they didn't, I would sneak out anyway. Now, I don't remember what exactly I told my parents that day, but they let me go to the woods. I remember looking for the usual path that I took to the forest, but for some reason I thought to myself, why not try a new path? I was soon in the thick of the forests, searching for mushrooms, and despite me taking a new and different path, I knew pretty well where I was. But something in me compelled me to go a little bit further than usual, but not too far, I reminded myself. Otherwise, I might get lost. If I hadn't known these forests so well, I would have probably been lost in the first 5 minutes upon entering. It's easy to get lost in there for someone who hasn't been there at least 100 times before, like myself. Now, I don't know how long I was in there, but I think I was still looking for mushrooms when I heard something that sounded like crashing branches. I was and still am very paranoid, so of course I nearly crapped myself, as it sounded like something heavy was walking around. At this point, I turned around and began to nervously walk back the way I thought I came, but soon I found myself lost in my own forest. I was pretty mad at myself at first. I didn't understand how in the world I got lost. I grew up here, after all, and I hadn't even gone that far. I was walking past trees, desperate to find a path or something that I could recognize. But of course, I did not. I started crying, still hearing the cracking branches. I tried to convince myself that it was just a deer, but my paranoia continued to rise. At this point, tears streaming down my face, I was praying while searching my way around desperately. I was looking for any kind of landmark I could find that would get me out of here. Then I stopped for a moment. There was a sense of relief flooding over me now. I didn't know why at first. I mean, I was still lost, but something in my head was screaming at me to turn around, and I listened. And what I'm about to tell you, it's true, although it's going to sound very bizarre. When I turned, I saw a man in a white long dress with long white sleeves and dark hair. When I saw him, I felt even more of a sense of relief. It was like I was safe as long as he was here. He raised his hand, and he pointed it to the left of where I was standing. "That way?" I said. He nodded. I looked at where he was pointing, and then back at him, but when I tried to face him again, the man was gone. Scared out of my mind, I started running in the direction he pointed, and 5 minutes later, I broke through the trees. When I was finally out, I realized that I was on the other side of the forest, the opposite side of where I had come from. Somehow, in that short time, I had walked several kilometers in the wrong direction. I made my way back home and later told this story to my grandma. And of course, she told my parents, who were not happy that I did that, and for a long time I was not allowed in the forest. However, when I did tell my grandma about the man, she looked at me and said that maybe it was my guardian angel. I sure hope so, because if not, then perhaps he was the entity that had been crashing through the forest, and maybe he had simply decided to spare me. But I can't be sure. I'm just glad I made it out alive. The Woods by the Park by Sophie. I'd like to think that ghosts are real, but I've never had any proof of their existence. So for most of my life, I've kept simply being neutral to that matter, until I had cold hard evidence myself that the paranormal was a thing. It happened last summer, and it all changed quickly. In my town, there's this park where a lot of people go during the summer. It's a very happy place that children go to with their families. There are many playground extensions for the kids, and even a small water park. During the day, I always get very positive vibes driving past there. So many people, all happy and dandy. Next to that park is some sort of forest. There's a very long bicycle trail there that countless sport enthusiasts like to roll onto, especially in the warmth of the summer under the cool shade of the trees. Personally, I've only taken my bike there once, and that was when I was very young. Anyway, at night, this place was entirely different. There's that awfully unnerving feeling you hear about that seems to inhabit the place after sunset. It's like how something so full of life feels when it's empty, like the corridors of an old high school after everyone is gone. My friends and I were between the ages of 16 and 20. We were a very close-knit group of friends, and we liked to go to parks and forests at night together, just for the heck of it. We were just hanging out, playing around with the different installations of the park, enjoying pleasant conversations amongst ourselves. At the time, I was getting these odd feelings that came in small, teeny-tiny waves, where I'd be kind of nervous. This never happened before, because usually my anxiety is different, and it would have a reason to it. But I pushed it to the back of my mind and thought it would go away. Suddenly, though, I felt something hit me. It's a very odd feeling and hard to explain, but I'll try. Imagine feeling a huge lump form in your throat, as if you were about to cry or vomit, but not feeling sad or tears or sick. It's like feeling your heart almost skip a beat and shivering from your shoulders down to your knees, almost feeling gooey on the inside, numb. "Hey, you okay? You look kinda pale," one of my friends noted. "Yeah, what's wrong?" the other chuckled, not really taking my distress as seriously. He knows I've done theater for a long time, and he likes pranking me sometimes. But boy, did I regret crying wolf at that point. I don't know, guys," I managed to say. Soon it wasn't only the lump in my throat. My heart was pounding as well, and I felt somewhat sad. But maybe my emotions were going haywire. That is what it felt like. I tucked my hands into my pockets, something I do when I feel vulnerable, and I looked toward the forest. It was so dark that night. We could see the forest illuminated by the moon, but nothing more. The bright, aggressive lights of the adjoining tennis court had shut off hours ago, and we were left in the dark for quite some time. There was this specific spot by the edge of the forest that I just did not feel safe with. Every inch of my body was telling me to get away from it. I decided to test this. I inched closer to it, and the feeling grew worse. I turned my back to it and took a deep breath, holding it. Let me tell you, even at about 15 yards from that spot, it felt like someone was going to grab my shoulders at any moment. So I quickly turned back and got away from where I was. "What's wrong?" my friend asks. It's just this spot it doesn't feel right. I don't know, I don't like it. I want to get away from it," I explained, looking at the ground, trying to manage my brain, which was marinating in a cocktail of confusion and fear. I was just about certain I was going to have a panic attack, but I gave it the benefit of the doubt. "Where exactly?" my friends ask. I pointed at the spot and shoved my hand right back in my pocket. I felt so cold, I didn't want to be in the park anymore. She diverted her gaze to the spot I showed her, and then she said, "What the?" By then, all of us looked at what she was staring at. Exactly where I'd pointed, there was a tall, shadowy figure. It was gigantic, surely over 6 feet, but definitely under 7. It honestly looked like some giant man just standing there in the forest. But that shadow didn't end in feet. We could see its head and the frame of its shoulders and its arms and torso, but around its knees, it was faded and unclear. "My God," my friend yelps, getting behind me. "This is just... what in the world?" my other friend says. All of us stood completely still now, staring at the shadow that we were all seeing. There was no way it wasn't real. We couldn't simply all hallucinate the same thing. We all described it briefly, and it was the same to each of us. My friend, being the person he was, turned on the flashlight of his phone and aimed it directly at the shadowy figure. Ever so slightly, it shifted, and that's when we ran. We didn't go far though, because we were too curious now, and I wanted to take a picture of me near the forest. I had heard that orbs may manifest in photos or videos of haunted places, so I stopped and took a photo. There were 2 orbs, one right next to my face. The other was near the spot that I was so uncomfortable with, but now the shadow was gone. I was in disbelief. We checked like 20 times to see if the orbs couldn't have been reflected by something, but no. And these orbs didn't look like bugs. By then, I had had enough. We all began running toward the parking lot, and I was beginning to feel dizzy. Quick as lightning, I unlocked my car and we piled inside. Sitting at the driver's seat and shutting the door, I get this huge wave of relief. Suddenly, it's like I'm free of stress that was building inside of me. Still, I had this odd feeling most people get after they're stressed out, like finishing a big presentation that you were nervous about. Your chest is still sort of heavy, but so light at the same time you just want to crumble down to the floor and breathe for a while. After I collected myself, I started the car and we drove away. My friends and I still don't know what that was, but it was no person. People have faces, people have feet. Maybe it was a ghost, or maybe something else, something dangerous. Maybe that's why my body was itching to run away, far from that place. My friends and I bought a Ouija board, and we're planning to go back to that place to see if we can catch sight of anything. Some may call us reckless, but curiosity pushes us, and we need to know what it was that we saw. Either way, I don't think I can ever forget this. Who or whatever that was, it felt sad, it felt troubled, and it felt angry to some level. And I need to know more. The forests of this world should be respected. We are but guests to its majesty and danger. Without respecting it, you could very well end up lost, hurt, or you may not be found alive if you're found. So when you go back into the woods, remember, be prepared. Don't be a doofus, and know that certain entities exist in there that you do not want to run into. So at any time, be ready to run. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the episode. And please, any iPhone, iPad, or Mac listener, give me a quick and honest review on iTunes via the link below. Also, remember you can share your stories at darknessprevails.org to have them in a future episode. If you want to support my channel further, go to patreon.com/darknessprevails. For as long as you donate any amount, you'll unlock access to ad-free MP3 downloads of each episode, and I'll put your name in the credits of full episodes I air on YouTube. Thank you. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode, about 10 real skinwalker encounters. Jose Dominguez says, I'll give you a skinwalker encounter. Hey, Jose, stop. I can only get so turned on, man. Zeppelin Girl 86 says, is that my husband calling or something more malevolent? It's probably Jose wanting to give you that skinwalker thing he's talking about. Just ignore him and he'll go away. Andrew Vilkins says, time for that post-Halloween goodness. I'd do this all year, baby. Around here, the scares never stop, and that's why you should click subscribe. Shower Songs Gaming says, they should be called skin crawlers. Well, skinwalkers is pretty fitting. I'll reserve the name skin crawler to cockroaches, because I had them fall on my face at night when I was trying to sleep. Now that's skin crawling in multiple ways. And Ashley Shake says, skinwalkers, just what I was craving. Yeah, skinwalkers are cool and all, but I'm craving pizza and ice cream at the same time, between slices of potato bread. Anyways, guys, that brings us to the end of this episode. But don't worry, because more scary stories are coming soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my patrons who continue to donate. They're amazing people. Stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.